Let me start out by saying that the experience I had at Marten was in February through October 2024, so 8 months. And I was based out of Atlanta, or rather Monroe, Georgia's DC, which is DC 6055. And I did my training in Tucker. Now, I'll give you a little bit of backstory as to how they ended up recruiting me and then move on from there. I was recruited while I was shut down in a snowstorm when I was OTR with Schneider. I was stuck in Pennsylvania waiting on the snow to clear so I could get a load. And Marten contacted me about 7 months after I'd applied to them. So I guess because they require a minimum of 6 months of experience before they'll actually hire you, I guess the reason why they contacted me 7 months later is because they would expect you to go through some sort of training when you come fresh out of CDL school. So being that when they contacted me, I'd already had 6 months of experience. They said, okay, great. Let me tell you what we have to offer, because the loads were soft at Schneider. And so they said, well, let me tell you what we have to offer. The Walmart dedicated account runs all the time. People never stop buying at Walmart. And we are basically based out of Monroe, Georgia. And there's a 200-mile radius, more or less. Now, you're Southeast regional, but you'll most likely be home almost every single day, if not every day. And so I said, that sounds really appealing because it would bring me back close to home and I wouldn't have to deal with all the drama of snowstorms and being shut down due to black ice or something along those lines. So I said, sure, bring me aboard. Now, at the time, and this has changed, and I'll tell you how here in a moment, they had me start on a Monday. Now, they would start training at different days. So it could be Monday or Wednesday or Friday. But what the training consisted of was 2 days of watching videos that give you a tour of their facilities. That way you would understand who how maintenance worked. You get a chance to meet the maintenance department over at the Tucker terminal, which is where I was based out, which was where the training was based out of. When I showed up early, they were like, okay, just sit tight. We'll get to you here in a few minutes. And it was about 15 minutes before the show time before they let me in. They wouldn't let me in before that. And so I went in there and they greeted me. We had to go through the whole procedure with watching videos. And they did. On day one, they took me out for a physical. And this is one of the things that they could do one of the 2 days. So it might have been day two, but regardless, one of the things they do in addition to making you watch the videos is they will take you out, show you the yard, show you where maintenance is, explain things, how things are laid out there. And then they will require you to do a physical exam consisting of going to a clinic nearby where they would put you through a regimen of, picking up different weights and bringing them across. You had to pick up something, I think 60 pounds, and lift it over your head and put it someplace, crawl underneath a table that was basically like simulating what it would be like getting in the back of a trailer. Now, all of this based on an account that is no touch. So you will not touch freight once you're hired, but they want you to have a minimum physical exam in order to get going with them. They also will make you do a performance evaluation, which basically consists of them taking you outside. You'll be walked through the procedure that they want you to follow. And that's just for the tractor. For the trailer, it's a little bit different. They will walk you through that. But basically part of what they would do is they would do pre-trip on the tractor. Then they would say, okay, let's go over and pick up a trailer. So you hook up the trailer. They want to see how you do that. And then you walk through the procedure that you would do. And they walked through the procedure for the pre-trip on the tractor. But for the trailer, with me at least, they kind of said, all right, well, let's walk through that too. But a couple of times he would ask me interactive questions. So I would answer those. Or I would just voluntarily ask a question because I was curious because, all companies are different. From there, he took me out on the road and I only went a few miles. It was, I think, 16 miles total. So it was down the ways. Then we looped a square, like went through here and then went back. And from there, we did a back, and it was a 45-degree back. So basically pull in and back up. And they said, obviously if you hit a cone, you're done. You're going home. No problem on any of that stuff for me. I aced both of them. They also will, as part of that physical, they will measure your neck size. And if you happen to have a neck that is in excess of 16 inches circumference, and what they're going to do is make you do a sleep study. And they're going to see if you have sleep apnea because they are very big about making sure that their drivers are adequately rested. They're all about safety. Now, my neck at the time was 15 and a half inches. So you would say, well, you don't have to have a CPAP. I already had a CPAP from when I was a martial arts instructor back in the 90s. Actually, it was early aughts. even then, when I was the best shape of my body and I was nothing but muscle and very flexible and that kind of stuff, even then I was holding my breath in my sleep. So by that point in time, by the time I joined Marten, I already had a CPAP. So one of the things that they did is they give you free sleep apnea supplies. So if you need a mask, you need the tubing, that kind of stuff, I recommend getting it even if you already have it, because you can request new CPAP supplies every 6 months. And it's good to keep that stock up. So if you have something that is still running strong after a few months, then you don't have to replace it, but it's good to replace them every 6 months while you're there. Now, they will give you a machine if you do not have a CPAP machine. That's fine. They will definitely set you up there. But you will have to give that back at the end. They don't require you to give back any of the supplies, like a mask or a tube or any of that kind of stuff. That's yours. Once they give you that, that's considered to be an expendable type item. But the machine itself, that's the big money right there. So they would want you to return that. Once you do the first 2 days of training, you are officially released, and then to your particular account. So if it's Purdue, if it's Walmart, whatever it happens to be, they will set you up there. This included OTR. OTR was in the same training class with us. Now, I was Walmart dedicated, so I came in for a third day, but only for a part day. So they brought us in and they sat us down and went over Walmart specific things. And in doing that, they trained me about the Walmart account. They had one of the mentors come in and talk to us about the way that it works on the account. Now, after that, they said, okay, go home and we'll contact you for a ride along. We're going to put you with somebody who's just going to show you how it works, and you're going to ride along with them on one of their trips. Was it that night for me? No. Yes, it was actually, because I finished at like 2:00 that afternoon, and then I went home and they said, you're going to go out tonight, meet back here at the Monroe DC at 2 a.m. And then my mentor guy was coming in at 3. So I met up with him. He had already pre-tripped the truck. So basically we went around, he went over the paperwork, and I filled out the stuff on the OmniTracks. Now, by the time you're watching this, the company at the end of 2024 was supposed to be going completely platform science. So if you're used to the OmniTracks, it's going to be a different system. If you're not used to it and you're not familiar with the platform science, they will probably train you on that. They'll give you a ride along if nothing else. Now, as I understand it, the way training is done is that they don't do the training class anymore. They let you watch the videos at home, and after that, they bring you in for a ride along where they supposedly train you in everything you need to know. But as of the time I left, they said, yeah, they don't do that anymore. They just let you watch the videos from home and then, send you off to your particular account. Now, let me tell you about the ride along. When I came in at 3:00, I joined a guy who took me around to 3 different stores. So basically, we'd pull up on one Walmart, we would unload. We'd pull up on another Walmart, we would unload. We'd go on a third Walmart, and we'd unload. Now, the procedure we had at the time is that we would ask them if they needed us to pull these stickers and put them on a piece of paper. It's changed a little bit over the course of the past few months. The way that they now do it, some stores don't require stickers at all. Some stores say, no, we don't collect stickers. Some stores still do. But then they're starting to scan. Sam's Clubs, for example, will scan a barcode. The stickers changed while I was there. And the stickers now include a barcode, and they're wrapping them around pallets. So if a pallet is square like this, they'll wrap the sticker around one corner so you can access it from this side or on this side, which is convenient. Now, only Sam's Clubs, as of the time of this recording, are able to scan those barcodes, but Walmart will get that technology at some point. So that way you just go over, you scan the barcode, and it's going to be a pallet number. Now, Walmart stacks pallets. So there'll be a parent on the bottom and a child on top, sometimes 2 child on top, depending on what it is that you're hauling. If it's something like watermelons or pumpkins, depending on the time of year, it may be pumpkin, 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 or watermelon, 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 or just pumpkin, watermelon, or probably not that combination, but pumpkin, pumpkin, watermelon, watermelon. So there may be 2 or 3 stacked on top of each other. Now, sometimes they would also do the same thing with regular pallets. There'd be potatoes on the bottom. Potatoes never in the time I was there, never ever had a sticker. But then there might be bananas on the bottom that would be up to like head height. And they wouldn't put a sticker on the bananas, but they would put a sticker on the top part. And that might be part of the same pallet, or it might be separated with another pallet, then have it on top. The big thing you have to watch for is that, first of all, the loads are sealed by the time you're given the load. By the time you get your trailer, you go to hook up to it and you verify the seal on the paperwork. If the seal is not there, then you'd have to inform the office because the gate will not let you out. The security gate will not let you out if there's no seal on it. And they're going to verify the seal based on the seal that the loaders put on it when it left. And if it deviates from that, they're going to say, okay, this can't go out. We got to investigate. So the main thing to note about the Walmarts versus the Sam's Clubs is that Sam's Clubs will have these forklifts that are motorized. They will ride them and they'll go very fast. They'll pick up and they'll barrel out. Some Sam's Clubs will require you to pull up there and then press this little thing down the locking dock, the loading dock that locks it. It will pull a little hook up to grab hold of your ICC bumper in the back. And if they do that, they don't want you leaving. Obviously, they'll flip a switch that goes from red to green, saying that you're locked in. The other option you will have is to unhook. So they'll say, okay, well, we require you to lock in, and then they'll flip the little switch there so it goes green. And some very few locations will require you to give them the key. Personally, I did not ever want to give them the key because who knows if the person's going to walk away. The person could very well go to a different part of the store or go on break. If that person disappears for an hour and they forget to turn in your key, then you have no luck in getting your key back until you're waiting there for a good hour. So I did not like that policy. I understand why. It's to make sure that it is safe to unload for the employees, but it was very annoying from a driver perspective. So the options are lock in, turn on the thing, and hand in your key if they ask for it, or you could go out to your truck and disconnect from the trailer. That way, there was no chance of you pulling away and I guess tripping or having the back open up or something like that, and it's being unsafe for their employees. Now, that was Sam's Club. Walmart's, they only use the motorized pallet jack, so they'll either pull them in there and then they'll zzz, like this, it'll lift up and then they start to pull them out and they push a button and it accelerates in or out. Or they will use the manual, coming up there and manually jacking the thing up and leave. Now, different stores go differently. They have to be certified to use the electric pallet jack. And that's fine if they are. It's okay if it's not also, because there are some locations where the electric pallet jack is fast. Some locations it's very slow. In the time I was there, some of the faster pallet jacks, Walmart corporate had brought people in for maintenance of the pallet jack. And in the 5 minutes of maintenance they actually did on it, they made it like a third slower. So it was like, it went from, let's say, 3 miles an hour down to 1. So people who were very slowly creeping along with it. And it was extremely annoying, not just to the drivers, but also to the employees of Walmart. Now, the other thing is the manual pallet jacks. Sometimes they did not have the forklift certification, so they wouldn't actually do that. And sometimes the people were forklift certified, but they did not like how slow the pallet jack was. So there was one guy, for example, in the North Georgia mountains who would pull up when he saw a truck arrive, he would get as many of the pallets loaded up in that area as possible, pallet jacks. And that way he would bring it in there, he'd jack the thing up, he'd pull it out, and then just basically toss it to the side where somebody would grab it. He'd run the next one in, jack it up, and run it out, and then basically hand it off. Do the same thing again over and over again, and then as the people would run it to the cooler and back, he would take that pallet jack from them, and he would run in there. He had a system down, and it worked great for that particular location. They were extremely fast. Now, that's another thing. Different locations have different speeds. If you go at different times of day, they may or may not be monitoring the door. I mainly drove overnight. So one of the things that I would start with is, depending on the time you started, they may or may not be in the loading dock area. And if they're not, and you ring the doorbell over and over again, you can try calling the Walmart location, but none of the Walmarts I ever called would actually transfer you to a person. It didn't matter what department I hit. One night I just sat there and I said, I'm going to press every single button. And then if it didn't take me to a person, I would hang up and call back. That's during their office hours. I could call or send a message to our DC, our dispatch department, and they would send an email to Walmart. But I typically found that didn't do any good, because the Walmarts, if they were paying attention, they would know you're there. If they weren't paying attention, they're never going to see the email. So to me, it was kind of a moot point. There were some times that I would show up there, and I would show up there 15 minutes before their scheduled lunch break. And the person that had the key, the only key to the loading dock that you could use to either let someone in to the loading dock area or open up the doors so you could open up the back of your trailer, that person would sometimes go to lunch early. or they would be inaccessible until lunchtime started. Then they would say, oh, well, we just released the store for lunch, including me. Well, I've been looking for you. I've been here for 30 minutes. I was looking for you for 10 or 15 minutes outside. Then I walked around and went in the front door, which is something you can do. If it's during office hours, they'll just automatically open up. You go to customer service and you say, hey, I got your meat and produce, for example. If it's after hours, then you walk up to the front and you have to pry open the doors and see if they open. Some locations will close them all and don't let you in at all, in which case you have to bang on the door, or you just have to look for an employee. And when you see them, shine a light at them or something to see if you can catch their attention. And if they do, they'll come over and they'll say, we're closed. And that's when you're like, yes, I have your meat and produce. I'm driving your truck, however you're going to make it known to them, because there's 2 layers of glass, with the entry, the outer entry, and then the inner entry on most of these stores. But once you get in, sometimes it's a chore finding somebody to get you unloaded. There were some places you would go, they would send the meat and produce department home, for example, at a certain time, like maybe 10 p.m. And when that happens, people would come in after hours and they'd be like, I don't know, there's no one here that can unload you right now. Well, someone's got to unload me. Who is it going to be? Be nice about it, obviously, but that was the attitude that basically I would take, is like, well, someone's got to unload me. Who's it going to be? And so I'd say, okay, well, who normally unloads at night? Because it's not like this is an unscheduled, very rare occasion. This happens every day, multiple times. So it's like, okay, well, let me see if I can find after hours maintenance. The after hours maintenance person may be the person that unloads you, or it may be a manager. It may be that they have somebody from frozen dairy that's scheduled to come by and help whenever that truck happens to be. So whatever the case may be, they will have you covered. It may take a little while, especially at like the 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., which is the time that if a store goes to lunch at night, they would most likely shut down the entire store. I was told by Marten, and I had never verified this by looking at the contract itself, but I was told that if a driver pulled up there, they were supposed to always have someone able to unload the truck by contract. But the Walmarts don't care. If they release the entire store, they release the entire store. Some places would release the entire store, but keep a couple of people on duty that was shifted a little bit. So that way they would go either an hour earlier or an hour later to make sure you were taken care of if you did arrive. And that would be if the ETAs were set in. Now, let me finish about the ride along real quick. I finished going through 2 Walmarts and 1 Sam's Club. Then I went back and they said, you're good to go. So the next night they sent me out on a truck. Now, as of the time I was recruited, I was actually applying for a work 5 days, off 2 days schedule. But it took them verifying my 10-year work history. It took them not until the end of that day. It took them until early the following morning in order to get that verified, in order to get that, to get the last bit of the verification. So when I called them the following morning at 9 a.m., they said, yeah, the 5-2 position's gone, but we do have 5-2, 5-3, which is slip seat. Now, slip seat, when you do the Southeast Regional, works great for the company because they would work you for 5 days, work driver number 2 for 5 days, and then driver number 3 for 5 days, cycle driver number 1 back in there again. So that way there is someone working in that truck every single day. But then if you work 5 days, you're home for 3 days, then you come back, you're going to be in truck number 2. So you're going to be in a second truck in your group. And then you would work for 5 days, and you go home for the other cycle. So if it's work 5 days, home 3, work 5 days, home 2, or work 5 days, home 2, work 5 days, home 3, however you consider it based on the cycle that you join. That means that every 2 weeks, you drift back a day. So if you start Monday through Friday, after 2 weeks, you're going to be starting Tuesday through Saturday. Then you're going to be starting Wednesday through Sunday, and you slowly start drifting. Me personally, I wanted to work on the weekends because you get, as at least at the time I was there, a 30-cent per mile pay bump if you worked on the weekends. If you worked at night, you got a 5-cent per mile pay bump. Now, one of the advantages of working at night also is that there's less traffic. In all the accounts that they send you to, you're going to have a lot less traffic to deal with. If you go during the day, that's when the Niagara trucks or the people that are delivering water, they're going to be there perhaps competing with you. There's going to be other Walmart fleet drivers at some stores. There's going to be maybe a Frito-Lay or some other, a Pepsi or a Coke. They're always out there too. There's going to be some sort of a truck that you're going to have to compete with. Typically, though, The meat and produce people would work at night overnight. They would usually send you out around about maybe 5 p.m. or so. And they wanted you done with that and sometime in the early morning hours by the time the sun came up is ideal. Now, after that, frozen dairy would start up at no earlier than 9 a.m. and you had a window to deliver until midnight. Now, the other thing you might end up doing would be a dry van load. So that would be a load that was not involving a reefer. And the reefers that they use over there at Marten for the Walmart dedicated account are 3 zones. So it would be a front, middle, and back zone, and each zone could have its own temperature. So if you were doing a meat and produce, for example, then it would be 40 degrees on the produce zones and 32 degrees for the meat zones. It originally started at 30, but then went to 32. If you were doing frozen dairy, the frozen is going to be at negative 20 degrees, and the dairy was going to be at 30 or 32. I did not do another frozen dairy after they changed the meat from 30 to 32, so it may have also changed as well. I'm not 100% sure. Now, the frozen dairy and the meat and produce loads are the reefer loads that you will do. You're not going to ever do general merchandise. You're not ever going to deliver bikes. You're not ever going to deliver, clothes or anything like that. Those are the Walmart fleet drivers. But what you will do is dry van loads for like, those are non-temperature controlled or temperature stable foods, basically is what they would call it. So if you ever are delivering chips or you're ever delivering pallets of water, those may be, maybe not the water, because they even then like to deliver those refrigerated for some reason. But if you're delivering chips, let's say, or you're delivering just, any regular food cereal, anything like that would show up and be temperature stable. So those could be at any temperature in the back of a dry van. Now, once you did either a meat or a produce, depending on the time you went in there, they would want you to either do another meat and a produce or a frozen dairy. So when I first started, I was hired for 11 p.m. They offered me also 4 p.m. because I told them I wanted to drive overnight. So originally I was hired and they said you can come in at 11 p.m. Then they told me before I started, you can give us whatever your PTA is, which is projected time of arrival, and we will have your load ready by then. So when I started at 11, I would go in there for one frozen dairy. I would go in for my frozen and dairy, and usually it was about 250 to 350 miles, something like that. And then I would come back in, trade out that trailer, and they would send me out with, if it was when I started at 11 p.m., they would send me out, depending on how long it took, with either a frozen dairy if I was to drive someplace and drop off by 9 and wouldn't be there before 9 a.m., or they might send me out with another meat and produce, depending on how long that run was. Now, it was one of those things where for me, starting at 11 p.m., they would send me a load, and it ended up being a pretty decent load that would take about 7 or 8 hours to do. So by the time I came back in, they would say, okay, well, we're going to send you out for a frozen dairy run, but it can't arrive before 9. And they would, if it arrives late, if it arrives early, it's considered late. So if it arrived before 9 a.m. and you hit, I've arrived on the GPS on the workflow, then it would pop up as early. Even if it's a minute early, they still consider that to be a late charge to the company. So there were some people that worked in the office that would not give you your paperwork until the number of miles of your first stop. So if, let's say it's 60 miles away, until that matched the number of minutes that you had before, you're supposed to be there. So if, for example, 9 a.m., and they were sending me out, let's say 60 minutes or 60 miles, then they would not release it to me until 60 minutes before. So they would not hand me the paperwork until 8 a.m. That to me was extremely annoying, but they've been burned in the past, and the people in the office would get in trouble for that. So I understand their position, but to me, it was annoying because you still have to pick up a trailer. You still have to pre-trip it. Then you have to go through security, and you are not instantly going to teleport up to 60 miles per hour and maintain that the entire time. But they've been burned, like I said, so it may be something that you would have to deal with, is being late on your leaving, and you can't arrive until before 9. Now, that was with frozen dairy. With meat and produce, you were basically driving overnight. You're not going to run into any competition in the docks, which is one of the things that was really good about going overnight. When I first started at 11 p.m. and I would have a frozen dairy after that, I was like watching my clock and I was constantly nervous about, come on, because it was almost always someone in the loading dock whenever you would arrive. If they only had one loading dock area and meat and produce and the water trucks and the fleet people would show up, they would have one or two of those docks filled with like a pallet truck and then maybe a couple of dry vans that they would unload throughout the day. But then they would only have one or two other dock spaces available and you would have to take turns for that. If it was in the middle of the night though, you wouldn't have an issue until after about 4 a.m. After about 4 a.m. was when the water trucks, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, Lay's, any of those trucks would start showing up there and starting competing with you in the dock. So what I started doing is when I first started at 11, they told me I could actually start earlier than that if I wanted to. So I said, oh, absolutely. I want to start as early as possible in the evening. So I started backing it up to 10. Well, when I was being sent out for a meat and produce first and then a frozen dairy second, I was almost always stressed out because I would get to the loading dock and they'd be full. And so I'd have to wait for an hour or so before I would get my opportunity to get in there. Then once I got in there, I'm like, come on, let's go. But obviously being polite about it. But then after that, it was like a rush back to the office. Luckily, it wouldn't normally be rush hour traffic. But still, it was very stressful because I'd have to get back before my clock would expire at noon. So I was constantly like, come on. And if they released the load late to me and I didn't arrive until 9:30, and there was someone in the dock, I wouldn't get out of there until sometimes closer to 11. Now, it is a Southeast regional position, so they would allow you to sleep in the sleeper. The problem that I ran into with slip seat on that is that God knows who was driving that truck before you. They could have been a smoker or a non-smoker. I'm not a smoker, and I requested a non-smoking truck, but there were sometimes they had to put you in a slip seat, because that was what was available. But if there was a smoker using that truck before you and they slept in the sleeper berth, then you would be smelling smoke. If they happened to have a small dog, then you would be smelling that dog. If they never took a shower, you'd be smelling their body odor. And not just them, everybody else who got in that truck after you. So it would be whoever was in that truck before you, you had to smell them and their situation for as long as you were going to be driving that particular truck. To me, that was highly annoying, and slip seat is nothing I ever want to do again for that reason. Now, Marten does do guaranteed pay, which is good. So if, for example, you were going to be a 5-2, which they don't hire for anymore, at least as of the time of this video, you made a minimum of $1,300 a week. If you were a 5-2, 5-3, you made minimum of $1,200 a week. If you drove overnight, you were going to make a minimum of $1,200 a week, regardless also of what your schedule was. But if you were under the small little group of people who needed to be home daily, you could request it. And at the manager's discretion, he could switch you to home daily. But if he did that, you were only going to be taking home a minimum of $1,050 a week. Now, that was never an issue for me because I drove overnight and I always like to hustle. The reason why this may be a bad thing for you is if, for example, you are day, then you would have to do a certain number of loads a week or a certain number of miles per week to get the guaranteed pay. And this is regardless of what it is. So if you, for example, needed to make 1,350 miles per week, so that averages 300 miles a day for 3 days, and then 250 a day for 3 days. So that's 750 plus 600, that's 1,350. So as long as you exceeded 250 miles for 3 days and 300 miles or more for 2 days of your schedule, you're good. Or you work an additional day, that's fine too. Or the other option is you work a minimum of 7 loads. So they may say, okay, you're going to pick up here, you're going to go 40 miles over to drop at this one Sam's Club and then back. Okay, then they're going to give you a second load that day because you were done in 4 or 5 hours. And then you might go to Claremont, and then you might go to Gainesville, and then you go back. And so that might be a total of 110 miles. The good thing is you're going to get that minimum pay as long as you do a certain number of loads or a certain number of miles. So you're covered there. Where it's not good is if you cannot get those loads. And it's the discrepancy of the office in their scheduling. Scheduling usually tries to make sure you make it. They would try to take care of you. As long as you have 2 days minimum that you are going to be going out on a second run, you should be good. And if you don't have your second run by the time you get to your Wednesday, you could start to request, can you make sure you get me 2 loads? I need 2 loads to make my minimum pay. The reason why this is important is because you are paid a minimum hourly. I'm sorry, not hourly, a minimum per mile, but then you are only paid $15 per stop. Doesn't matter if you're there and you pull up there and you go on duty. It doesn't matter if you pull up there and you are waiting for an hour or waiting an hour and a half or waiting for up to 3 hours, which happened to me one day, one early morning. And then they take an hour and a half to unload you. If you're there for 4 hours, you're still getting $15. Now, technically, you could put in for detention or something like that. I never really had that successful with it because it's basically they would call detention if it was running late. So if you were detained, they would know that you were detained because it was after the time you were supposed to be arriving there. So it may end up working where you could put in for it if you were, and you just contact the office and let them know. But from my perspective at night, it was if I was scheduled to do something and it was after the time it was scheduled for delivery, that was when I would start to see detained money show up on my pay slip. Now, if you drive by day, you'll have more competition. And you may say, well, how are you ever, if you don't get, let's just say, if you drive like 6 miles to the Monroe Walmart and you do that, let's just say every day, you're not going to make any money. Every load there pays a minimum of $50. So if you end up going 6 miles and back and you're just dropping off a trailer and then you're dropping and hooking and bringing one back, you're going to be done in 45 minutes. And that's including your pre-trip and post-trip and that kind of stuff. But still, you're going to be paid $50. Not a bad deal in that circumstance. Sometimes they would have you drop off a dry van load and then pick up a pallet load and then drop that off, or pick up an empty, something like that, depending on what they have available. So being paid a minimum of $50 is good. But then also there would be a pay bump based on the account you're on, or if you're working overnight, or if you're working weekends, it would tally in the extra pay bumps accordingly. So that's good. They take care of you there. And as long as you do your minimum of 7 runs per week, you could do you could do a total of 7 runs that are less than 100 miles, only bringing back like 600 miles in a week or so, and then say, well, geez, I'm at least going to get my guaranteed money. The thing to me was, I would rather drive overnight. You're going to get longer runs. You're going to be able to get back and do a second run. So almost every single week that I was out, every single day I got 2 runs. I would usually be sent out on what was considered a noise ordinance load first, because when I first started, and it started at 11 o'clock and then instantly dropped back to 10. Then I was starting to be stressed out because of the frozen dairy and competing with people in the morning at the loading docks, because not all the loading docks at Walmart are open. They'll sometimes say we close at noon. We don't receive after noon, or receive after 1, or receive after 3. So people are trying to jam in the docks when they can. Now, so I backed up my schedule. When I backed up my schedule to start at 7 p.m., it was difficult to 9 p.m. It was difficult for the planners to schedule me. They would send me out for a longer first run of maybe 300 miles. And then I'd come back and they would say, I can't schedule you for a second run, because by then they would have already given away all the Sam's Clubs that they normally want you to arrive around 4 or 5 a.m. They would have already given all those out. And so I was not going to be available to actually get a second load. So they'd say, I don't have anything else for you. And then after a while, they said, it's very difficult for me to schedule you when you come in at 9, because I can't give you a frozen dairy, because you would violate your clock. You can't arrive there after 9, and that would be 12 hours into your schedule. So they asked if I'd start at 7. They said 7 would be easier for them to schedule. And I said, sure. One of the biggest issues I ran into running meat and produce overnight was that I would run a larger first load, so about 250, 300 miles. And then I would come back to the office by about maybe between 1 and 2. Then they would give me a second load that was a meat and produce to go to a Sam's Club. And usually it was one entire trailer to that Sam's Club. The issue I run into is that people start showing up at the Sam's Clubs early, sometimes an hour or even more early. So if I showed up at the Sam's Club at 3 a.m., I would sit around and wait, but at least I'd be first in the dock. Sometimes I wouldn't be first in the dock, and I would have to wait for somebody else to clear out. Now, technically, the Walmart trailers take priority over anybody else, but not all Walmarts adhere to that. Some Walmarts are like, nope, we're first come, first serve. I don't know where you get that from. You're no different than anyone else. Some places were like, well, he's Walmart, so I'm going to do him next. And I ended up butting heads with a water truck at one point, a super ego delivering some water because he had shown up there at like 2 a.m. I showed up there just after 3 a.m. and they don't open till 4. And so when I pulled up there, I told him, I said, I'll need to jump in there. And he was like, nope, not going to happen. And I was like, well, I'm driving a Walmart trailer. He's like, I don't care. And now that I think about it, I arrived just after 4, and there was the meat and produce already in there. I was delivering overflow meat and produce. Now that I think about it, it was my last little bit because I had delivered everything else, and then I got there slightly after 4. I saw our meat and produce guy was in there, and then there was a truck that was already ready to back up. He had already gone in and talked to them. This is why I was not remembering correctly. He had gone in and talked to them, and they said, "Yep, as soon as he's out, you'll back right on in. So we'll get you right in here." But then when I showed up with the other meat and produce and I told him, I'll need your spot, he said, you're after me. And I said, no, I drive a Walmart trailer, so I take precedent. He said, nope. And so I was like, okay. I went in and talked to them. I said, well, I'm going to go inside and see what's going on. So I went inside and told her I have the other part of their meat and produce. And they said, all right, you're up next then. And I said, all right, you want me to tell the driver out here? He said, yep, go ahead and tell him. I went out there and told the driver, and he instantly got mad, as you can imagine. He instantly got mad. He dropped a couple of cuss words. We went inside. He went and talked to the same exact lady, and she said, well, I told you to come in, but Walmart trailers take precedent, so he's up next. You'll be right after him. As soon as we walked out of that door into the outdoor area, he started up a storm. He was not happy. He was cussing. He was mad. I understand, but I still had to line up. He was lined up directly in front. And being a Sam's Club, they don't make it easy for you to do backing blindside on an angle. He wasn't about to move and let me have it easy. So when our driver pulled out of there, I had to back in blindside at an angle. I did it, but he wasn't helping me out. But you do have precedent as a Walmart driver, pulling a Walmart trailer. Not everybody knows that though. There were some places I'd pull up there and somebody would see me and they would just look at me and say, do this number. And I would just nod. And then they would say, okay. And then he'd pull right on out. I would pull in and he would just stay lined up in front. So that way he could back in after me. That happened a few times because those people understand the game. That was like a Coke truck or a Pepsi, one of those. Sometimes though, you pull up and there's already a truck there. You can go inside and kick them out of the dock if you want to. But that usually to me didn't go over very well. A lot of the times the Walmarts would say, he's already here. He's unloaded half of the 4 pallets he has. Let him just grab the last 2. He'll get out of your way. Okay. But then what happens is those trucks, they have to verify their load. They don't just drop off and have sign off on the pallets because our pallets are packed by Walmart. They go in there and they basically look at the bill of lading that they pull up electronically. And because they pull it up electronically, they know what each pallet number based on the sticker is and what it should have. And if something doesn't match, they will let Walmart know that there's something missing. With Coke and Pepsi and others, they have to go through and say, okay, I have 6 of the vanilla Coke. Okay, where are those? Right over here. Okay, next thing on the list. We have Diet Cherry Coke. Where are those? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, those are good. And they'll have to verify everything like that, which can take a while. But what you can do sometimes, if you're like, okay, I'll let you finish unloading here, but as soon as you're done unloading, if you pull your trailer out and then come back in to verify, then we're good. I would usually do that. Even then, sometimes they'd say, I only have a little bit to verify. Let me verify it and then I'll be out. And I'm like, come on. And I'm sitting there just getting frustrated and stewing about it. That happened occasionally. But usually I would have drivers that would be pretty good about that. They would understand that you're going to work with them. They would work with you. Only occasionally did it happen otherwise. Now, in the time that I was there at the Walmart account, I then backed up from 9 p.m. because I really got stressed out at showing up at these at these Sam's Clubs after 4 a.m. when everybody's allowed in. Until 4 a.m., it's only meat and produce with very rare exception. Like maybe a bread truck would pull up there, but they just have their own lift off the back. So they would go in and out the side door. Maybe occasionally there'd be another truck too, but usually they were not in the docks. In the 8 months I was working there, the only time I ever saw somebody in the docks was either one of our frozen dairies or it was one of our other meat and produce. And that only happened twice. And there was only one other time somebody else was in the loading dock. that night. And I went over there and I spotted them, and they were just getting back in there. And they said, yep, they didn't even need me for anything. Actually, I take that back. There was one other time that somebody had pulled up. I had to remove, the dock was completely full, so I had to move out a trailer. So I dropped my trailer, and then I picked up one of their empties, and I pulled it out. You have to always find out what empty they want you to use, to pull from inside the loading dock area. So you have to go inside and do that. I pulled it up, and I started dropping. And as I'm dropping it and unhooking it, I see a Coke vehicle pull up. He's going to take the spot I just got through opening up. So as soon as I was done, I went and hooked up my trailer again. And I went over there. And as I was actually on my way back to the trailer, because I just got through, I was doing the landing gear and disconnected. I already post-trip the trailer, which you have to do when you do a quick drop and hook. I went over there and I rolled down my window and said, hey, I just had to pull out this trailer in order to make room for me. He said, well, they probably don't even want anything from me. Let me just go inside and verify it. If I have to pull out anything, it'd be one pallet and I'd be done real fast. And I'm like, and I kind of paused for a second. He said, by the time you hook that up, I should be out of here. I'm like, all right, we'll see how it goes. Go ahead. And so since I was already in there, the office was, the loading dock was already open. The guy goes inside there. I go and I pick up my trailer. By the time I hooked it up, he was pulling out. So apparently he was right. He wasn't lying. But I backed in there and all was well. Now, if you do an overnight, you're going to have less traffic. When I was starting at 7 p.m., I was stressed out like crazy at the end of the night because if I showed up at a loading dock, if my first run was too long and I showed up at the loading dock and there was other people there, it would end up pushing me later and later. And depending on where they put, it could be me dealing with Atlanta traffic driving back, which is really annoying. And so I backed up my schedule from 7, I'm sorry, I think I said 9 before. I had already backed up to 7. And that's when I started getting the Sam's Clubs or the 4 a.m. stores, which also includes some neighborhood markets. There was also a very occasionally what would happen is that there would be a store that would have to close down for a noise ordinance between, let's say, 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So you could only catch them after those hours. So I would show up there and be waiting for them to take the cones out and go pull in there at 6 a.m. But then you have to deal with rush hour going back to Atlanta or going back to the Monroe, D.C. Now, so I backed up my schedule from 7 to 6 p.m. When I did that, I started getting more of these noise ordinance runs, which I never got before. They don't give them to you if you leave at 7 p.m. unless there's a problem. And they say, well, if you can come in, we'd like you to come in a little bit early because this is a noise ordinance run. If you come in at 6, they'll give you a noise ordinance. And me, I would always come in extra early. And then right before I left, I changed it to 5:30. So I was coming in at 5:30 every day and I got a noise ordinance almost every single day. So I would do that. And basically a noise ordinance run would be one that you have the first place you go has to be delivered before 8 or 9 p.m., sometimes as late as 10. As long as that one is done, then they would send you to another location. And after that, you were pretty much good to go, smooth sailing. And then you go back and you pick up a longer run. The biggest issues you run into with overnight stores is that some locations, like neighborhood markets, will shut down the entire store at 2 a.m. Very occasionally would they leave someone off the clock. If they shut down the entire store at 2 o'clock, they would very seldomly leave someone off the clock that was available for you to unload you. It was usually you'd have to wait until 3 a.m. And then when they came back in, they'd bellyache at you, if you would have shown up before, we would have, and then you wouldn't want to hear it because it's like, look, you just delayed me an hour, if not, longer, because you might have been knocking on the door and it took a while to get in there. One thing about different locations to note is that different locations will have different things they do at different times. So there were some stores you'd go to, and they would be very on the ball. They would know you were going because they would constantly look at the ETAs, or they would receive a notification saying truck is pulling up or truck ETA is this, and they would start doing something in the loading dock area. So that way, when you pulled up, they would make sure that you were ready to go. And that way they'd say, okay, he's here. And they would as soon as I'd pull in there, the door would be closed on the side, that the locked door. But as soon as I'd back in there, they would have the door already open. So I just literally come out, run right inside there, and they would have the door to the back of my trailer open, waiting for me to unlock it and open it. And Marten does require you to not only have a seal on the back, but they also require you to lock it. That's policy. You have to have the door locked anytime you move the trailer. Many people don't after the first stop, going to the second, third, because they'll be sealed. Many people don't as they go back with an empty. It's still policy. You're supposed to have it locked all the time. So I wanted to make sure that was you were aware of that. Sometimes the stores were ready for you. So the second they knew that you were pulling up there, they'd go ahead and be ready to unload you. Some stores weren't that way. Some stores you'd pull up, they didn't know because they didn't receive a notification that you were coming. Or they would have looked at the ETA earlier in the day and said, well, you're supposed to be there between 2 and 3 a.m. And so you would pull up there at like 9 or 10 and they would say, oh, geez, we have to unload you now. And they would be very frustrated about that. Here's the thing about the ETAs. You have the ability to change your ETA on your device. So if you use OmniTrax, you would basically, when you got to a stop, you could put in the ETA that you're going to be arriving at that next stop. If you're on Platform Science, they did the same thing, but the procedure was a little bit different. You put in your ETA, going to the next place. But I think it was a little bit smarter in the way that particular system worked, because the ETAs would travel to the Walmarts better. Now, some of the Walmarts were on the ball. Some of the Walmarts weren't, and they would just bellyache at you when you showed up there at whatever time you showed up. And then they would say, why are you here? Why are you here so early? And it's like, well, I was just assigned to. Walmart assigned me to come on out, so I came on out. And they're like, oh, geez, now we have to do whatever. Now, there's some stores you would be assigned for. Like my first run would be one of the longer runs through North or South Carolina. And there was one store I remember in South Carolina that I was scheduled to arrive at, and I think it was like 8:30, maybe 8:45. And when I showed up there, they just shook their head at me. They said, you're going to be waiting until at least 10 because our people don't come in to unload the refrigerator back there until 10. They come in at 10. And then they would come in. And so I waited. They came in. They had a team meeting from 10 until like 10:15. Then they all went in there and pulled out the stuff out of the refrigerator. And that was the only way meat and produce was going to fit in there, is if they pulled stuff out there in order to put it on the floor. But they could not get to me before that. So that happened to me one time where I got delayed at that particular store, and I had to sit there and wait for an hour and a half until the people came in. Then I had to wait another amount of time for them to finish their meeting. And they were just like, well, I don't know what to tell you. You're just going to be waiting for a bit because they don't come in. So they should have told you. I'm like, there's a lot of things they should have told us, but they never did. That's the problem, is that they would not ever communicate those kinds of things. We don't get those kinds of notes. What we would get notes on is you're not allowed to park there overnight in this Walmart parking lot, or you're going to be going into this loading dock as opposed to this one. Or it would say, make sure that it would have a bunch of weird codes in there, HM 13. And you're like, what does that mean? And just different things that just made no sense to me as a driver, but apparently it made sense to somebody. Now, there are some stores you go to, they were very on the ball. And I really looked forward to going to those stores. There's some stores that just were not, and they just did not get their notifications, or they did not pay attention to them. And some stores had multiple people that had keys to the docks, like sometimes the maintenance person did. Sometimes the team leads would. Sometimes it was only the manager on duty. If that manager had decided to step out and they weren't answering their phone, then who knows where the person was, and you had to wait on them. So it just depends on the location. Some locations were more organized than others. Now, with regards to times, if you work during the day, you had to follow the window that it said deliver between 9 and whatever time for like a frozen dairy. And it would have a window that they would want you to arrive at. If you drove overnight, they would say there's a window on there, but deliver anytime, because they would know you're going to go there. Now, the only kicker was Sam's Clubs would open at 4 a.m. So if you arrived there at 2, no problem. You could say I've arrived early, even though they don't open until 4 a.m. But the neighborhood markets that don't open for you to do deliveries until 4 a.m. or 6 a.m., depending on if they just don't open their docks before 4, or they don't open for a noise ordinance until 6. If you go into the computer and say, I've arrived before that time, you've cost the company a late fee, and they're not going to be happy with that. So you got to pay attention when they give you a paper it's going to have little seals on there, because once you take off the seal at the first stop, you're going to put another seal on there to go to the next store. Then you'll put another seal on that store when you load it back up and you seal it before you go to the next location. What every Walmart is going to want to do is verify the seal and then pull it. However, training tells you that you are not to pull the seal, they have to pull the seal. When you get to a Walmart, they say, I don't ever pull the seal, the driver does that. We're told not to. So if it's a battle of wills where you say, I'm not doing it, they're going to say, I'm not going to do it either. If you refuse and they refuse, they'll go back to work someplace else and you're stuck there until you decide to pull the seal. So what I would usually do is I would say, do you want to pull the seal or you want me to? And they say, you're all right. I see it. Or I'd say, as long as you see it, I'm good. And they would say, that would pull their eyes to it where they would verify it's intact. And then I would say, here's the seal, and either hand it to them or I'd hand it to them with the paperwork that I would collect at the very end. And they would usually say, we don't collect them. So either way, I would want to make sure that they verify that the seal was at least intact, if nothing else. They didn't verify the number. They will temperature check the load. So they're going to check, depending on the store, there's a policy that Walmart tells them to do. They will do at least a minimum of one pallet in each section. So if they pull one from the, they pull, let's say 6 produce and then 2 meat, one of the produce, they're going to temperature check either with a thermometer or with a gun going over and pressing it. And they'll take the temperature, and they want it to be within a certain range. Like produce would have to be below 41 degrees. Meat, they would want to be closer to 30. I think they wanted it to be below 39 or below 40 or something like that. I forgot what exactly it was, but meat, obviously being that produce is delivered at room temperature, most of the produce is at least on the floor, they would usually be a little more lenient with that. With meat, they wanted it to be closer to frozen. So if you had taken off a bunch of produce pallets to pull the meat pallets in the middle, in the second zone, and then put them back on there, and the produce was 43 degrees, something like that, they might look at you and say, hey, at the previous stop, did you pull off the produce? And you'd say, yeah, I had to let the previous store get their meat. And they say, okay, we're good then. And then they would be fine with it. They were technically not supposed to, but some stores would, because they would said it's completely useless. All of this, none of the stuff that you're delivering here, it's not like there's refrigeration involved. Like if you were delivering berries, that would have to be in the refrigerator out front. But if you're delivering watermelons, and you're delivering bananas and stuff like that, and none of it needed to be temperature controlled and none of it was going to be in a cooler, they would say they require it, but it's at 42.1, it's going to be fine. Why throw out? They're supposed to throw out all of it and completely scrap the entire thing if the temperature is above a certain thing. But with produce, they wouldn't always, because they would say they would look at it and say, all of this produce is going to be put out on the floor at room temperature. So it's really not good for them to throw out all that produce and get new produce in there for being a degree above, because it was outside the trailer from the previous stop to this stop. Because sometimes you'd have to pull up there, you'd have to pull off 4 or 5 produce in order to get to meat. And sometimes you'd have to pull out the meat to get to the rest of the produce. So sometimes that was the way it was. And what we would usually try to do is make sure that we would keep them on the truck if at all possible. We would just move everything over to one side. Then we'd try to move everything back to the side. So we only had to pull out some of it. Or if we would have to pull out, pallets, we would try to keep them in the trailer and shift them all to one side. And they would just pull pallets around whenever possible. But they were usually very adamant about their temperature checking, and they would follow the company policy, but they would also use a little bit of their own common sense, I would say, to make sure that things were within temperature, because they do not want anybody to get sick from anything they do. That's something that they are very adamant about, is that they have these temperature checks. They want to maintain control of everything properly, so that way no one ever gets sick from their food. But still, if let's just say there's 10 produce pallets and then there's 8 meat pallets in the middle section, if the first store only got 6 pallets of produce, you'd have to pull 6 pallets off that they would get and put in their own coolers. Then you'd have to pull off the next 4 pallets of produce and put them to the side. And if you can't put them all on the trailer, because the way that the baffles would flip up and the bulkheads would flip up. So that way they were temperature, controlled. They were like insulated. You would have to pull them completely off of the trailer. And then they would pull their meat. Then you would drop the bulkhead again. Then they would put the pallets back on. But if your next store was 10 minutes away, it may have raised up to, let's say, 50 degrees by the time it pulled out. And by the time you get to the next store, in 15 minutes, by the time you get to your trailer and your truck and you drive it over there, it may not have dropped back down to a full 41 degrees or whatever the requirement is. So the Walmarts would sometimes use common sense on it. And I say common sense in quotes because to me it was common sense. Who wants to throw out, a few tens of thousands of dollars worth of stuff that's going to be sold at room temperature on the floor? It made sense to me, but they would still have to follow the guidelines. So what they would normally do, the other thing they would do if they say it has to maintain this temperature, they would sometimes stick it in there. And if it would get to about 41.8, they'd say, let's keep it in there. Keep it in there. So that would mean that I would have to keep it in there with the reefer running. And then once the temperature dropped to that point, which could be 10 or 15 minutes, once the thermometer dropped, they would say, okay, now it's at 41. Now we can pull it off. So basically they're just chewing up my time waiting for the temperature to drop on the load because of the refrigeration on the inside of the trailer. On that note, when you first pick up a trailer, it's going to be put in, depending on if you're picking up a Carrier or a Thermo King, it's going to be either in start-stop mode or cycle sentry, which means that it's going to get up to the proper temperature, then it's going to shut off and let the insulation do its magic. But when you first pick up a trailer, you're supposed to turn it into continuous mode as you hook it up. That way it's going to constantly, when you open up the back, it's going to be pumping out the cold air. And that way the air, like if this is the trailer, the 3-zone trailer, the first zone and the second zone are going to be temperature controlled. The third, as soon as you open up the back, it's going to be shoving out cold air, but it's going to be slowly losing to the temperature of the store, right? It's going to be slowly acclimating to that temperature. But keeping the air cold in that section is wise. Now, as soon as they close it back up, if they're just dropping off there, or they would have to pull those pallets off and open up the second zone and pull off that meat, the temperature stays keeping that meat as cool as possible. When you close the bulkhead again, then you load the produce back on there and everything is closed and sealed. It should be in the ideal circumstance and position for you to actually keep things temperature controlled. That way you're not just opening up the entire thing all at once and letting all that cold air out. So that was something that was very, very important as well. One of the things they started doing while I was there is Walmart changed their policy with regards to backing up. They said, we're running into drivers that are not being safe. So they required everybody to get out and look when you arrived at a Walmart location. And to verify this, you had to send a free-form message from either your phone or from your tablet or Omnitrax that said goal every time you arrived at a location. And they would verify that it was about the time that you logged in as you arriving on the system. So you would pull up there, you'd have to jump out, get out and look, and then you'd have to send the free-form message. Then you could back up. If you didn't and you bumped into something, you hit their power transformer, you hit a yellow concrete post or something like that, then you would get in trouble because you didn't follow company policy. So I understand them wanting to cover their bases, but to me, it threw me off because once you were pulling in there, I would verify that there was no one in the dock. And I'm like, okay, good. That dock is completely clear. I'd pull on up, line up, and I'd start to go straight on back. And then after the policy went in, you now have to stop and get out and look. And I'm like, okay, everything is fine. Now I have to send the free-form message. Then I could back up. You know what, though? It's their company. It's their policy. They're allowed to tell us to do whatever they wanted us to do. That's fine. Every time you back up a combination, you had to do this. That was something you were required to do. So when you dropped off and you were back at the DC distribution center and pulling back in there to drop off your trailer at the end of the night, you still had to still send in that free-form message and goal before you backed up. Some people didn't, but those are the people that are going to get in trouble if they ever do hit something. Aside from that, most of the time, the people in the office would learn what you are going to excel at. They're going to learn the kind of loads you like to do. And whenever possible, they'll send you out on those. I liked going to the North Georgia mountains. To me, they were just It was beautiful up there. Even in the middle of the night, it was completely clear. No one was out there. During the day, North Georgia mountains are crazy. So people hate driving up there, or they would drive it during the day because they would only want to see it drive in the mountains when they could see things. At night, though, they were like, I don't want to drive up there. It's so unsafe. I'm like, there's no one on the road. It's completely clear. You can go whatever speed you want without people cutting you off and whatever. So it's going to be fine. But me personally, they knew that I like to do a noise ordinance run first. Then I like to do a meat and produce second store after that. And that was when I wanted my longer load. So they learned me after a while. The office learned that also I was somebody that doesn't like to waste time. That's not to say that I'm just stomping on the gas pedal and speeding to all my locations. Still got to be safe about things. I still lived in cruise control. Whenever I was on a U.S. or state highway or an interstate going a long run, I would almost always use cruise control. And obviously for cities and stuff like that, you don't do it because it's not a good idea to. But they learned pretty quickly that I like doing that kind of stuff. But I also was not one of these drivers that would pull up and say, okay, well, here's your trailer. And I would just sit back there and play on my phone and let them unload it. And it would take 45 minutes to an hour to unload any trailer in the middle of the night. They knew that when I would go there, I would knock on the door, ring the doorbell. If nobody opened it within 5 minutes, I'm running around that building. I'd go inside and start telling everybody, hey, meat and produce has arrived. I'd be nice about it, and be jolly. And then I'd go back there and I would say, hey, you want me to collect stickers for you? Or I'd say, do you collect stickers here? If they said yes, I'd say, you want me to collect them? Yes, if you would, that'd be great. Because if not, somebody has to pull it off the trailer, verify, look at the sticker, verify it against the paperwork, make sure it's right. And then they would have to look for any of the child pallets. And the child pallets are no longer listed on the paperwork. But if it would say there is a total of 15 pallets at this location and there's 12 pallet positions, then you would know that 3 of those pallets would have a child, a second one on top, or there might be one that's triple stacked. So you'd have to just keep an eye out on that because you'd want to make sure the stickers you deliver to them would match 15. Sometimes there were pallets that did not have stickers on them. Bananas, for a while, they never had stickers on them. And that was one of those really annoying things. The bananas, when they started putting stickers on there, they're extremely annoying because pulling them off of that plastic they use on the Chiquita bananas and the one bananas and stuff like that, is extremely annoying. So it would always tear. The way you would have to do it is if the sticker was stuck on there, you'd have to pull the plastic. So that way you'd have to pull it horizontally. The sticker's this way. You'd have to pull it laterally, like sideways along the way it's stuck to break that seal and start pulling the sticker back. Otherwise, the only way to do it is by grabbing the whole entire sticker and ripping it off the plastic, and then you'd have to peel at it. So you start learning little tricks like that. When the scanning goes into effect, it's going to be nice. But the office starts to learn the kind of stuff you're good at. They knew me as a driver that never took a break. I would just hit the road, I'd start going, and then I wouldn't stop until I was done with my shift. Some drivers would go in there and they would just, sit there on their phone, or they would just kind of casually talk to everybody. And then they would be all happy. And, when it was done, they'd go out to their truck and take a break. Or some people would come inside, they'd open up the back and then say, all right, let me know when you're done. And they would, wait for the paperwork. And somebody from Walmart would have to go out there and hand them the paperwork. Or they would give their phone number. I guess, I don't know. I'm speculating because I was never one of those lazy drivers that would do that. I would always be the kind of driver that would say, let's go. I'll help you. I'll help you. You're not allowed to touch the food. You're not allowed to handle anything. There were times that I was like, okay, what you have to do with the pallet jack is jack the thing up this way. I would have to tell them, if you pulled it around this way, you're going to be fine. You're not allowed to do it though. But I would always leave it out. I would always say, if it were me, I would try this, but it's your discretion because you're the forklift operator. I would always make sure that I'd said that because you're not supposed to touch anything. You're not supposed to touch it because let's say that you pulled off a pallet and the thing collapsed. That would be on Marten. Or if they were starting to pull something out and the top pallet got caught by the lid of the gate as it lifted up and it knocked over that pallet. If you tried to stabilize or you pulled it off there and then you tripped and you dropped it, that would be on you. And then you would get in trouble for that. Now, I started learning my stores. Some of my stores knew that I was going to do the stickers and that if I saw something, I'd either call it out, hold on a second, or I would say, hold on a second, let me just at least stabilize it. So I put my hand on the side. That way, like sometimes there are these they're like they look like cardboard, but made out of plastic, and they would be a baffle up at the top. And sometimes that would knock off a pallet that was very delicately balanced. And I would say, hold on a second, let me stabilize this. And I would hold it just on the back so that way they could pull it through that and wouldn't knock over the pallet. To me, when I would point that kind of stuff out, I started to develop a reputation of, I like you, you actually help with the process. I would tell them I don't help with the actual unloading and I don't help with, cleanup and that kind of stuff. Even though sometimes there were people that I would. There were sometimes that they'd pull something off and like the refrigeration unit would have dripped. If it drips on cardboard and the cardboard weakens and the pallet collapses and it drops a bunch of mangoes off the thing or something like that, I would look at it and I'd be like, yikes, there's a lot of mangoes down there. And I would know that they're going to have to clean that up. And if it's one person that's pulling everything, then I would know it's on them. And so I would look at them and say, I'm not supposed to touch that kind of stuff, but I will if you want my help. If you want me to participate or help, I will. And they would say, yes, please. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, yeah, I won't hold you responsible, something like that. And they would be, they would be the containers down there. All you do is flip the thing upright and you start putting them in there. After a while, I started learning the people that were just like, no, I appreciate the help more than just you sitting there with your arms folded or looking at your phone. And they would not hold me responsible for something like that, for helping the process. Now, they tell us in Marten training to get out of the way if the pallet starts to fall. You get out of the way if the pallet starts to fall. But sometimes it would be a little unstable. It'd be leaning a lot. And if you just get back and fold your arms and let them pull it out there, it will wobble and it will most likely be okay. What I would usually do though, is I would at least put a hand on it or something like that. And I would, if it started, I'd at least pay attention. And if it started to wobble a little too much, I'd push back at it a little bit. Obviously giving myself an out where I would jump back and I would always let them know. I'd say, well, if it starts to fall on me, I'm jumping out of the way. And they'd say, yeah, please. But I would stabilize it and it would almost always be fine. And I say almost always because sometimes I didn't need to do anything. I would just have my hands closed or I'd be standing there and it was fine by itself. Never once did I stabilize it and it collapsed. If it was unstable, I wouldn't touch it. I'd say, I'm not going to touch this when it's too volatile. Usually what they would do is they'd pull it back and then they would shove it up against a wall, or they would just try rocking it. You start pushing it and rocking it, and then it would push itself up. So whatever they want to do, you just have to be very careful if you involve yourself in the process, because Walmart does not want Marten people to touch it, and Marten does not want employees to touch it. If you do, it's on you. I knew that about me, and that was the only company policy I ever violated, and that was because I would see that there was a crate on the ground and what's it to pick up a couple of, things that had toppled, because our Walmart trailer that we were delivering, even though it's technically not Marten, it's Walmart, even though that dripped and made the cardboard wet and then collapsed. If it was one person that was unloading me, they would just have to have a big, huge cleanup. So I would usually say, you want a little bit of help with this? 'Cause I'm not technically supposed to, but I'll do it if you want some help, and, don't call me out on this. And they'll say, oh, no, you're helping. That's fine. That kind of thing, But again, that was me technically not following company policy. But I would never do it if it was stabilizing something that was like, oh, this whole pallet's like about to collapse. I'm going to put my shoulder or back against it or something like that. I would more stabilize it just if it was still safe, but just to add extra stability in case it got wobbly, or cleaning up, something that if it was already there on the ground and all the containers were there on the ground, I would help with that process too. Aside from that, I would usually end up making pretty good money driving overnight. They said, obviously you would get a minimum of like $1,200 if you drove overnight. Usually my checks on when I was working 5 days within a pay period were pretty good. If I worked 4 days in a pay period, because remember, slip seat is 5/2, 5/3. So on the days that you would be home for 3 days, if those 3 days were all in the same pay period, which they will almost always be in one or the other pay period, you got to have 3 days off. So either it's the first 2, then you work 5, and in which case you're fine. Or it would be you have 3 days and then you're off for 4. I'm sorry, you'd have 3 days off, then you'd be working for 4, or it'd be the other way. So you'd have 4 and then you'd be off in that cycle. So it would always be some sort of a thing going on there. And Most of the time I would get the miles I needed to get myself over 1350. And that was always good. Marten made sure if you work at night and stuff like that, when you start to establish yourself as very, very, on the ball, very dedicated, they would take care of you. And the people in the office, if at all possible, they would give you the kind of loads that you like. Occasionally they would call me and say, we need you to do a frozen dairy, because the driver that was doing it, they broke down. So after I did my first meat and produce noise ordinance, they would say, we need this to be delivered before midnight. Anything you could do would be awesome. So I would go and pick it up. And sometimes I'd look at it and say, if to give me a fighting chance, I'm going to have to ignore the paperwork. I'd have to ignore all the electronic stuff. I'd just have the people sign the paperwork at the store. Do whatever you can, see if you can get it delivered. And then it was on me to try to get it delivered before midnight, which is fine. Every single time I ever had one of those, that was the situation I was in. And it was always a race to 12 o'clock. Obviously not going to, speed down the road or anything like that, but, don't waste any time. And I always made it there. Even if it was like one time I made it there 5 minutes till midnight when I logged in and said arrived. I was, yeah. But the company knows what you like. And so that way, if I would run my first load and my second load was not loaded up yet, sometimes in the office, the night shift would say, okay, you know what? I can swap you to this other load because it's ready and the driver's, an hour out. So your load will be ready for them by the time you get back. So I'm going to swap you with them. And it's like, awesome. So that way you're moving. That way you could go ahead and lead. Sometimes they say, I can't swap you. So you'd have to wait there an hour or two, waiting for your load. But most of the time, the office would take good care of you. Aside from that, the company actually, I'll tell you this, I love the people there. The fleet manager was awesome. I loved him to death. He was really, really good to me when I was there. Very understanding. There was a couple of times when I had like a really good load. They were sending me out for like over 400 miles and I was going to get it all done. I was going to get back and that was a good load. But then I was called in and they said, we really need you to take this load instead. You're going to have to do this frozen dairy because the people called out sick. And it's a frozen dairy that was like 125 miles. I'm like, oh, that's going to kill my, I was going to get some good miles. The manager would take care of it. He'd say, you know what, by the time you do that first load, whatever load we give you the second load, we will make it up to you mileage wise. So if it was supposed to be like 406 miles, then add up your miles for the night. I'll take care of the rest because you're helping us out. They would make sure that you were taken care of. And that was always good. That's something I really do appreciate about Marten. The people in the office were great. Love them to death. They were quick to laugh. They understood it was a stressful thing. I mean, logistics is not scary. It is stressful on them, but they were always really nice about it. Walmart runs the loads though. They plan the loads. So if it's going to be this store to this store to this store, the office can't change that. If it's these three stores, they would, and built into one trip or one trailer, they couldn't change that. They would have to change it up. They would have to change loads or whatever by trailer. They couldn't change it and say, well, let's take out the first half of this truck and put it in this, or this trailer and put it in this other one. They can't do that. Nor can they schedule, this driver needs to always have this load to this one store. Walmart doesn't care. They say, this is what the loads are. If one store required 6 produce and 2 meat one day, and the next day it was 10 produce and 1 meat, they would schedule it that way. And so it may be that you would go to one Sam's Club, could be 27 pallets. And they say, just going to go to the Sam's Club. It could be that you're going to a Sam's Club and you're going to a Walmart because the Walmart was a bigger one that took 14 pallets, and a Sam's Club may be 13 pallets, but it may have also been a full trailer that was 27. A separate trailer was 27, and then you were doing the overflow. It could also be that you were only going to be delivering meat. So you might go to like 5 or 6 stores and just deliver meat because your entire trailer was meat. And the produce would be arriving on different other types of stores. So it just depends on how Walmart positioned it and pieced it together. Sometimes things would change. Sometimes things weren't. The big thing that did not change is the times of the loads when they could be delivered and when they couldn't be. Now, during Hurricane Helene, a lot of our stores got shut down and they were without power, or you couldn't get to them because of downed trees or something like that. In which case we had to hold those trailers. We would unload. We'd have to move off all their pallets and then unload the store's pallets, then put all those back on there, go to the next store, have to remove all the closed storage pallets and then put them back on there. So that way they were in the nose of the trailer. We had to do that sometimes, but then the nose of the trailer would be full. And then they would say, okay, when that store opens back up, we'll deliver this trailer there. So our DC parking lot got kind of full on those kinds of trailers during Hurricane Helene. And they also, when they first started opening up again, they were flooded with different vendors that had to try to build back up the supply in the store. So there was one store I went to that had been closed for a couple of days. When I got there, like 3 dry vans had just got through dropping off all of the stuff, and their loading dock was a maze. I went in there and there were pallets were like stacked up 7 feet, and I'm like squeezing through them as well as I can with my build. And then they were like, all right, so where are you? I'm like, this dock right there. And there was like 4 pallets stacked deep against it. So they're like, all right, we got to move this out. And they had like a 6-foot area where they would have to pull pallets out and thread the needle going between all those stacks of pallets, because it was the only way they were going to be able to get my trailer out. And because I was there in the middle of the night, they started just putting pallets of dry, of temperature stable stuff in the halls just to get them, in the aisles of the actual store in order to get them out of the loading dock area. It was nuts. Some stores, they had damage to them and they were closed, and either power outage or they had, roof damage or something like that. And they had leaks, different situations. But in those kinds of situations, one thing you can count on with Marten is that Marten will shut down the fleet if it becomes unsafe. If they're like, nope, we have bad weather in this area. If you are east or west of this one area or north of this area, shut down. You're not to move, or come on back, come on back to the DC. They would pull you on back. They did not want you driving in that. Some of our drivers got stuck. Some of our drivers got stuck due to a down tree or something like that, because I don't know their situation. They might not have gotten the notification, or it may have been safe there and then a tree fell down as the winds were starting to grow before it really became crazy. I don't know the situation, but what I do know is that Marten would always tell you, if it's unsafe, shut down. You do get paid if you are shut down for bad weather. That's one good thing about Marten, is they do pay you up to $25 an hour for up to $250 a day if you are shut down due to bad weather, because they self-insure. Because they self-insure, they don't want you driving in a mess if it's bad weather conditions. So they would say, we don't want you driving in it. They want you to be safe. They want to set you up for success, and they would want you to do that. And it's very wise of them to do that too, because the drivers do care. The drivers do care, and they want to make sure that they are safe and that they are still making money. I've worked, when I worked for Schneider, Schneider would tell you not to move in bad weather, but then do we get compensated? No, you don't. So a lot of drivers are like, well, geez, if I'm not going to get compensated, I'm going to run it. If you run it and you get into a crash or something like that, that's on you, obviously. But that was Schneider's position on it. Marten's not that way. Marten will pay you if you shut down for bad weather, because they understand that it's a very important thing from a driver perspective and from a customer perspective, delivering products on time. So I think that's, for the most part, the Walmart dedicated account running out of Monroe, Georgia. That's DC 6055 out of Monroe, Georgia, on Marten, which that was my experience when I was there. I really do like it. The only reason I left there is because I was offered to actually go to a different company that would issue me my truck, an actual truck that would be mine and no one would be sharing with me. And it was also the same thing. It was considered Southeast Regional. So to me, Slip Seat works great from a company perspective because it keeps the truck asset basically fully occupied every single day. It's going to be out with someone, and that's great. It's not good from a driver perspective because, for the reasons I mentioned before, who knows who has been driving this truck before and their sanitation and hygiene habits, or if they had a dog in there with them. It was God knows what condition it was going to be left in. And also it meant that there was a lot less pride on the actual truck, because people would drive the truck. They would say, oh, well, this is, starting to go bad, but you know what? I'm going to just write it up and then give it to the next driver. There were times I would pick up the truck and the truck was assigned to me, and they'd say, yeah, you're going to do this. Then you're going to take the truck to the Tucker terminal to get fixed. I'm like, what's wrong with it? And they're like, the camera needs to be resynced or repaired or whatever. I'm like, why wasn't this done with the previous driver? This is your truck. It's your responsibility. I'm like, so the truck was given to me with an issue that I had to take to fix. If I was responsible for the trailer, like the truck when I worked at Schneider, for example, if I noticed something from a daily basis that started to be off, I could keep an eye on it. I'd say, wait a minute, there's a little bit of moisture here. There's a little bit of leak. I'm going to keep an eye on that. If the next day, if it was worse, I would maybe call maintenance and say that we have a very slow leak. I'm going to keep an eye on, just letting you guys know. And if it got very bad one day, I would contact the office. When I was also driving and my bunk heater went out and it was no longer working, I took it into the office to get it fixed. I knew it wasn't working because it went out on me. I knew that. Slip seat doesn't work well for that circumstance because you could get in the back and be sent home, and then you go out the next day and you come back. Another thing slip seat doesn't work with is that when you are slip seat in your Southeast Regional, they could say, okay, well, once you come back in, okay, you're good, go home for the night. And then they'd say, oh, you're a different truck tomorrow. And I could have come in to pick up that truck and start at 6 p.m. and the driver that was driving the truck the day before came in at 9. And if that's the case, all of that driver stuff is in my truck right now. So I would either have to, one, take all of their stuff, pull it all together and take it in the office and sit it down there for them to grab, or I could just simply leave it in there and say, not my responsibility. And they can just get it afterwards. Usually I would inform the office that there was stuff left in there, so that way if the driver came in there and it was still assigned to me, they could go in there and grab their stuff. No one ever did. No one ever did once. And there would be their sheets, their clothes sometimes. They would have food back there, drinks and whatever else back there. But, to me, if I'm issued a truck, I want to be the person that's responsible for the truck. That way I could get to know it. That way I'm responsible for it. That way I can take pride in it. And that way I would make sure it's cleaned. That way it's, it's fueled up properly, because sometimes these people would take a slip seat trailer out or truck out, and even though they're supposed to deliver it fully fueled and full on DEF, they wouldn't. It would come back in, it would have a quarter of a tank, or the DEF would almost be completely out, but it would have, 3/4 of a tank of fuel. And I'm like, great. So I'd have to stop what I was doing and refuel it sometime during the day. Even if it wasn't convenient, I would have to go out of my way sometimes, because if I'm driving around certain Walmart locations, sometimes you're not going to run into a Pilot or Flying J fuel stop along the way. And that's what they want you to use, is Pilot and Flying J. So I think that pretty much answers everything about the Walmart dedicated account, at least from my experience. There is no dress code. They want you to obviously wear something professional. They don't require you to wear vests. They don't require you to wear, long pants or long sleeves or anything like that. Obviously, wear good shoes. Something that's slip resistant, obviously, would be beneficial. I usually continue to wear the long sleeves and long pants that I wore on my previous account, which was the flatbed account, Pod's flatbed dedicated with Schneider, which they required you to have long sleeves and long pants. And so that was good, but they never required you to actually wear any type of official Marten type clothing or gear or anything like that. So there you go. If there's anything I missed or any updates to Marten by the time this video goes live, or by the time you see it, if you are a Marten driver on the Walmart dedicated account, especially in a different area, if the Atlanta area, if you're working there, please by all means say, I work out of Monroe now and things are a little bit different. Let me tell you, please put it down in the comments below, because it may help out another person that's looking to join the Walmart dedicated account. And if you are a different area of the country, then please also add that to the comments below, so that way we would know that we would know and have this video be a selection of information that they could get the most current information, and including down in the comments below. So hopefully we'll make this video something that would be a good resource to people. Thank you very much for watching, and I might see you on the road sometime.